Hello there, welcome to Bryan Lomax Movie Talk and the final review in my Psycho series. This one, of course, being the 1998 Gus Van Sant remake. Now, just before I get into it, I do just want to remind you that Cody Leach has also been making his way through the Psycho movies, and he's putting out a review for this film also on his channel at the exact same time that I drop mine. So once you've watched this, if you haven't seen his already, do head on over to Cody Leach's channel and give his review a watch. Yep. So 1998 remake. What do I think of it? Well, when I first saw this, way back when, in '98, I was quite appalled by it. I didn't get it. I didn't see the point of a shot-for-shot remake. It made no sense to me. Taking a classic, one of my favourite films indeed at the time, still is, and yeah, not doing anything new with it, not doing anything different with it, and it just seems so pointless to me, absolutely pointless. And for that reason, I would have given this film a 1-star rating, and I haven't watched it again since, until now, for this review. I went into this with no expectations. Well, I did have expectations, actually. I expected to just hate it and want to rag on it, which is why I was quite surprised, actually, that this time round, watching it, I could really appreciate it on its own terms, I guess. And there are some things about this version that are indeed better than the Hitchcock version. We'll get into that. So, you know, of course, the original is still a classic. Without that, we wouldn't have this film. This film just wouldn't exist in any way, shape or form without that classic. Hitchcock is the man, obviously, and Psycho is still one of the best horror films of all time. But what does this film have going for it? Well, for one thing, some of the performances, some of the side characters. Now, I will say that Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates is still the weakest link for me in this film. Which is a shame because obviously he's kind of like the main focus of the story. Certainly once we get, you know, a third of the way into the film. He doesn't embarrass himself. He still acquits himself reasonably well, but there are times when I feel like he's a little out of his depth. He has done a lot more dramatic work since this, but at this time, this was kind of one of his first big kind of turns into dramatic performances, and I do get that sense of unease with him, like he's not too sure that he should be there, and he probably shouldn't. Like I say, Anthony Perkins really owned that role, Vince Vaughn not so much. But with pretty much most of the other characters, all the side characters, I really feel like we get better performances, dare I say. And again, that's no slant on the original cast, because as I've said many times before, that original Psycho is one of my favourite horror films. But I think particularly Viggo Mortensen adds something to the role that he plays here that just wasn't there in the original. I felt like this guy that he's playing in the original, Marion Crane's boyfriend, he didn't have much character to speak of. There wasn't really anything there. You know, he was there mainly as a device, a plot device, a way in, so to speak. Whereas here, I feel like Viggo Mortensen, being a higher caliber actor, he manages to inject little bits of character into this guy. So we get a sense of who he is as a person, even though we don't get much on the page. Now, we are still using Joseph Stefano's original script, obviously, because it is a shot-for-shot remake. But yeah, I just think Mortensen, he adds a lot more character to this guy. He gives us a sense of someone who maybe isn't fully on the level, but kind of gets through life on his charm, and you know, doesn't feel to me like someone who has any kind of malice in his heart, but he's maybe not the sharpest tool in the box when it comes to emotional growth and things like that. But yeah, so I liked what Mortensen did. I like what William H. Macy does in the role of the private detective. Again, I really liked the role in the original film, but I like what Macy brings here, and I like him as an actor in general anyway. But I think he adds a bit more character to this guy that I kind of like. It's a shame to see him go when he eventually goes. Obviously, for anyone who's seen the original, there's no surprises there. What I will say is I'm not overly keen on Gus Van Sant using some of the exact same techniques and shots that, again, like I say, it's a shot-for-shot remake, but the bit when Arbogast falls down the stairs, when he's slashed in the face and he falls down the stairs, it just looks so dated. It's one of the things about the original film that still, it doesn't look that great. So if you're going to modernise, at least maybe make some things look better like that. And on the whole, Van Sant does. The rest of the film does indeed look better. Like some people gasp at that, but that's not necessarily because of any skill on Van Sant's part. He is essentially, ripping off the shots that Hitchcock gave us. But what he does have at his disposal is developments in technology. So you look at that opening shot when we come in outside the cityscape, and then we come straight into the window and then through the window. You can see that that's what Hitchcock was kind of alluding to or trying to suggest in the original, but he couldn't quite pull it off because the technology just wasn't there. So we have these shots that kind of fade from one to another, and it's a bit jarring. It doesn't quite work as well as it should. Whereas here we do get that opening shot the way that I would imagine Hitchcock intended. There's no breaks in the camera. We don't do any fades or anything. It starts right out in the city, and we come right in through that window and straight into the scene. So things like that, from a technical standpoint, have been boosted. They are better. Now, that's not a subjective comment there. That's not me saying, oh, this film is better than the original. It's not better than the original. Obviously, but on an objective level, they are able to pull things off that Hitchcock was clearly trying to go for but couldn't, not because of his lack of skill, but because the technology just simply wasn't there. So, I've got to give credit where it's due. From an objective level, there are certain elements of this film, technical aspects, that are actually better than the original. Does that make the film better overall? No, it doesn't. But again, I still think we can't just dismiss it and say, oh, it's absolute trash, it has no value. And at the end of the day, it is still using Joseph Stefano's script. It is still using that same script. If it's a shot-for-shot remake of an absolute classic, if it doesn't really do anything different, it's the same film, then it's still a good film. Okay, so I think the biggest argument, or the strongest argument that can be made against this film, is that it is arguably pointless. If you are giving shot-for-shot remake like this, you're not really giving us anything new, so it does kind of render the film pointless. But I kind of look at it at a different level, and I don't know if it's just my age or whatever. Like I say, as a younger man, pointless. Now, I kind of look at it like theatre. You take Shakespeare, the play hasn't changed for, whatever Shakespeare played, Romeo and Juliet. The play hasn't changed for hundreds of years, and you get different actors performing that same play on stage the same way it's always been done, and yet people still go and see it because they want to see different actors take on those roles. And I see this as kind of the same thing, and that's what Van Sant was going for. It's one of the things he's mentioned in some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, that was his approach, that that's the way they do Shakespeare on the stage. Why not do that with films? One of the reasons behind that being that you introduce it to a new audience, an audience that never would go and check out the old black and white one, simply because they have a prejudice against black and white films. I mean, more fool them, they're missing out. But hey, if it gets them introduced to the original, this way, by doing a shot-for-shot remake, then fine. There is value in there. There is validity in that decision, which I can kind of see now. Whereas years ago, I maybe would have pushed against it. I do like Anne Heche as well in this role. I've always kind of liked Anne Heche. There's something a bit off kilter about her, a bit kind of strange. She's had quite a tough life, it must be said. She's dealt with some demons, and I think a lot of that comes through in her performance. I think when you have someone who's gone through stuff, who's had troubles, who's dealt with things, I think it makes them a more effective performer in many ways, because a lot of that stuff can be channeled and can be driven through their performance. Yeah, I like her here. I don't know if I prefer her over Janet Leigh, but I certainly don't think she disgraces the role. I think she brings just as much presence to it. I like what she does. A particular standout scene, once again, as it is in the original, is that scene in the parlour. But it's a really long scene of dialogue in which Norman and Marion are just talking, and you're getting all this stuff about their past coming out, but not explicitly. It's just like a lot of stuff that they're alluding to each other, things like that, and it does. Yeah, it's a really nicely written. Again, props to Stefano's script. I know Hitchcock gets a lot of the credit, but it was actually Stefano who did kind of push for the idea of focusing on Marion Crane to start with, and then doing that switch partway through the film. And yeah, props to him for that, because he gets some really good scenes in there from a script standpoint. This being, as I say, for me, the standout. I do think, as I say, again, Vince Vaughn being the weakest link, I think this scene doesn't quite work as well in the remake as it does in the original, just because the subtlety with which Anthony Perkins brought to this scene was amazing, and you only realise how subtle he was when you see the way that Vince Vaughn plays this. So there's a moment when he does a bit of a turn, you know, and he kind of like he feels a bit rattled by something that Marion has said, and he goes a little bit too full on with it. And it kind of makes you think that at that point, if I was Marion, I'd be out of there. And I don't just mean out of that room, I mean out of the motel. This guy's clearly a few fruits short of a basket. Whereas in the original, I never got that. You get the sense that, yes, there is a history there, is a darkness to Norman, but because of the subtlety that Perkins brought to that moment, you never got the sense that Marion was in danger from him. Whereas here, you get the sense that she's in danger from Vince Vaughn's Norman. So yeah, for me, that scene is kind of mishandled from Vaughn, but again, it's still beautifully written. I like Julianne Moore as well. Again, Julianne Moore, she's one of the best actresses working today. She's not really going to put a foot wrong in most cases. She injects a few little bits more of character. That's bad English, I apologise. But yeah, she injects a bit more character into some aspects of it. Again, no slant on the original performance. I just think it's a different take, and that's kind of what I enjoyed about this film the second time around. I didn't sit there thinking, oh, I can't accept this actor or whatever in the part. I just looked at it and thought, you know what, what does another actor do with this part? How would someone like Julianne Moore take on this role? And it is interesting to watch in that regard. And like I say, if you treat this like theatre, you can appreciate it, I think, you know, seeing what other people do with the same script, so to speak. There are obviously a few other kind of obvious changes, one being the fact that this film is in colour, and it's beautiful as well to look at, it must be said. You know, the use of colour here, it's something that, quite frankly, Hitchcock wanted to do himself. He only shot Psycho in black and white to get past the censors. You know, he made it easier to get some of the violence in the film past the censors by shooting in black and white, a trick that Tarantino would later go on to use with Kill Bill. But yeah, if Hitchcock could have gotten away with it, he would have shot Psycho in colour. And yeah, Now we get to see what it's like in colour. Some people might argue that, oh, that's neither here nor there, it's still a classic in black and white, it looks better in black and white. Well, it's a matter of opinion. But the opinion of Hitchcock is that he would have rather have shot it in colour. So here we go, you can see it in colour. And as I say, beautiful it is. The cinematography is lovely. You know, the framing of the shots obviously are great because they're aping Hitchcock. But the colour of it is also really beautiful. And of course, we get Bernard Herrmann's score back once again, this time reworked by Danny Elfman, but it's essentially the same score. Elfman doesn't really do any changes here. We just get to hear it in stereo sound, you know, surround sound. So it's a lot more beefed up. It's got a bit more impact to it, dare I say. Again, that's not about Bernard Herrmann not being as skilled a musician as Danny Elfman. It's about that advancement in technology, the way we record these days. Just means that we get that beautiful score by Herrmann in a bit more glory. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up that review. I'm going to give this a 3.5 out of 5. Now that's as much a surprise to me as anyone. As I say, I was expecting this to be a 1-star film years ago, couldn't see the point. I've warmed to it. I've warmed to it considerably, it must be said, and I will quite happily watch this again. And I think next time I watch the Hitchcock original, I will probably follow it pretty soon after with this one. I think they make a nice kind of double feature. Just, again, yeah, seeing what different people do with the same material. If you haven't seen it, check it out. If you have seen it and you didn't like it many years ago, maybe check it out again and see if you can appreciate it now on a different level. But yeah, 3.5 out of 5 for me. Like I say, the original's still the classic. That's still the one that set the benchmark for many films to come. But I think this film is all right. Yeah, I'd quite happily watch it again. Yeah, but what about you? If you have seen it, do let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. Also, let me just quickly remind you, check out Cody Leach's review of this film. Head on over to his channel now if you haven't seen it already and give that a thumbs up and share it and all that other lovely stuff. Yeah, thank you for watching this video. And until next time, cracking.